Now for Ringside Remembers, and a man who, although having been out of the ring for almost 21 years, is still one of the most famous faces in Britain. His name is Henry Cooper. My first question to him when I caught up with him was, how did he get started in the boxing business?
Well, I suppose we all started originally, I suppose, an uncle of mine, Uncle John, which was my dad's youngest brother. When we were about 6 years old, he bought us a pair of mini boxing gloves. So you can imagine me and George, then whenever there was a family get-together, me and George showed off. You know, we knocked lumps off each other, like being twins, we were the same weight and same height. So it was Uncle John, I suppose, who started this. But, I mean, I suppose Dad, he did a bit of boxing. And naturally, he did what all dads do. If you was in the boxing game, you got on your knees with your sons, you know, and you taught them the fundamentals. And then after that, I suppose we grew up listening to stories about Grandad, because his father, my granddad, his name was George Cooper, he was an old bare-knuckle fighter. He fought bare-knuckle gloves, and he fought the old sporting club. And we just grew up listening to stories about Grandad, you know, and all his escapades, what he did over the years. He was into boxing and horses in them days, because at the Elephant there was a big, I don't know what they call it, depository or repository, I don't know, where they used to buy and sell horses at the Elephant and Castle, where all the Diddy-Kais and gypsies used to come up from Kent and sell and buy horses. And he was an expert on horses, you know, so horses and boxing was his life, yeah.
So Henry started his boxing career thanks to family involvement, but his early days as a professional highlighted a problem which were later to plague him: cuts.
Well, I mean, in them early days, I suffered little nicks and cuts and abrasions, if you want to call it. And I used to get uptight a little bit, you know, and it was only later on then when Jim Wick said, look, we sat down and said, look, you've got to realise, you know, if you get a cut, it's not the end of the fight. I mean, I had a very good cuts man, Danny Holland, who was my trainer. He was, well, not so much a trainer because I used to train myself, but he was a great cuts man, Danny Holland. And he was as good as any of the American cutsmen, you know. I mean, he had a great technique. And I found out then that even though I got cut, he could treat the eye, he could stop the bleed, and then I could go on and win. So eventually I learned to relax a bit more. And afterwards, actually, whenever I got a cut in a lot of my fight, I was at my most dangerous, because then I knew I had to sort of pick the tempo up and perhaps try to end the fight quicker than I naturally would have done, because I was frightened that the referee was going to come in and stop the fight, you know, me having a cut eye. Yeah.
Henry had now made a name for himself, and in January 1959 he was to fight Brian London for the British and Empire heavyweight title.
Well, that, I think, physically, that basically was the hardest fight I ever had. Now, you wouldn't think that, because a lot of people said, well, London wasn't the best fighter in the world, but in them days he was a young guy and I was a young guy. He was about a stone heavier than me when we fought. And he had a bit of bottle in them days. He was a tough and hard guy to fight. And I had a nosebleed right from the first round, and I had cuts above me eye and below me eye. It was a real gory fight. If you see photos of that fight, I mean, talk about horror films, and nothing compared to that one. And I'd been swallowing blood for 15 rounds. In them days, it was 15-round fights. And I can always remember going home, and I was stiff and I was hurting. I said to my brother, run a bath, George. I said, I must lay in and get rid of some of this stiffness, you know. And that's the worst I've ever felt after any fight. And I can remember getting in this bath and literally collapsing. And then my brother had to get me out of the bath, he had to dry me, he had to put me to bed. And then about 3 or 4 in the morning, I woke up and I was in agony because where I'd been swallowing blood for 15 rounds, it all congealed in my stomach. And I was in agony. Christ, I thought I was going to die, but thank God it all passed the next day. But I always say that was the worst I ever felt after any fight. You know, that was fighting London in '59.
Henry was to be remembered for that controversial fight with this young man, Muhammad Ali, when in the 4th round he floored the great man with the legendary left hook. He
came over, he said, right, we've made the match. Solomon, I think it was Levine, you know, made the match. And I was confident I could beat him. I was confident I had the style to beat him. See, because if you looked at Ali's record up to then, all the big guys he's fought, you know, and when I say big guys, I mean like the heavy guys, you know, like who were 6'3" and 15.5 stone, he looked good against. But if you looked against the guys who'd give him trouble, there was a guy who was blown up like that, called Doug Jones. Now, Doug Jones had took in the distance, and lost on points. A very controversial, and he always reckons he got he fought him in Louisville, I think, and he always says that it was a bit of an hometown decision. He always thought he beat, so he gave him it. And then I had a guy called, now what's his name, Johnson. I'm just trying to think of his first name. He was a great fighter. He'd fought Ali and give Ali a lot of problems, and he could copy Ali's style. So when we fought him, we brought him over as a sparring partner. Now, we have wars in the gym. I mean, I can always remember Solomon or Lorraine coming to the gym, and they had kittens when we were right. They said, "Here, you can't." And Jim said, "He'll be all right." So I carried on sparring with him, but he was a good sparring partner. But yeah, I had the style to beat him, and I think you know, up to that time in '63 when I had him on the deck, he sure didn't trip, that's for sure. You know, I mean, I called him, and when you catch a guy with a good punch, you know you've got them. And the great tragedy was I called him too late in the round. Yeah. And then Angelo Dundee, who I've met several times since I've had dinner with him, and he openly admits, he said, look, he said, when Ali came back to the corner, he said, I had to get time for him to recover. He said, the only way I could get time was to cause a commotion. He said, I happened to notice on his glove, the right glove, the stitching on one of the thumbs had stretched a bit. He said, so I just stuck the scissors in and ripped it and called the referee over. Well, the referee then had to go back to the steward in charge who sits around ringside. Steward in charge had to send the guy back to the chief whip in the dressing room and get another pair of gloves. By the time he got back, he had what he wanted, 2.5 minute interval to survive, and that's what happened. Then he came out and he hit me on the eye, and the eye was so badly cut, I mean, it was pumping blood, and the referee then had no option bar and stopping it. But I always thought, up to the eye, that injury, I was holding my own, I was in front.
Henry admits to having had much harder fights, but there'll never be another Muhammad Ali in Henry's eyes.
No, I think his style was unique. So if you look at Angelo Dundee, who was his trainer, you look back and see he had about 5 fighters. They were all world champions. They all boxed the same style. He looked at young guys, the style he liked, and then he managed them or trained them and then improved on what they had. If you look at the first one he ever had was a fellow called Ralph Dupas, who was, I think, a welterweight or welterweight champion of the world. He was a sticker and mover. Dundee's favourite, stick and move, you know, left and move. Then he had Willie Pastrano. I had Willie Pastrano over as a sparring partner. I mean, he came as a sparring partner for me before he was world champion, won the World Light Heavyweight Championship. Then from Willie Pastrano, then he had Muhammad Ali. See, and all them guys, they were all very similar in style, but Angelo Dundee used to like that. He could work with guys like that and build on what they had. Yeah.
Henry lost his next fight, no disgrace, to Floyd Patterson, but then came this man, Jack Bedell, another of the good domestic heavyweights. By now, Henry was in his 30s.
Well, he was awkward. See, Jack was a lot of people laugh at Jack Bedell. I never did laugh at him because he was a better fighter than a lot of people ever give credit for. If you look at Jack Bedell, you look at how many fights Jack Bedell had. He had 68, 70 fights, which there's not too many fighters have that, man. And you look at and he won most of them. And he was a southpaw. He was awkward. He used to stamp on your foot. He used to knee you in the shins. Whenever I used to box, I used to have a blister under me toe. Whenever I fought Jack Bedell, I used to have a blister on top of me toe because he used to keep stamping on it. But he was awkward as a pig, as I call it, you know. But I mean, he was a big, strong, like, awkward guy, but not a bad fighter. But thank God I beat him on 2 occasions as well. Yeah.
10 seconds to go. And you listen to this crowd when this is over. There's the bell, the end of that British Heavyweight Championship fight, and it's Cooper. Henry Cooper has got the British title back, and the whole of Wembley is jumping to its feet. That is a really remarkable performance by the 35-year-old Henry Cooper, the first man since Len Harvey to regain the British heavyweight crown.
So more domestic opposition was put away. He was still a class apart, and he regained the European crown by beating the Basque, Jose Urtin.
I don't know if you noticed the trophy cabinet, there's a great big berry, a Basque berry, and they had that specially made because they thought he was going to win. and it was 4 in. They were going to, all the bats were going to present to him when he won. But when I beat him, they were very nice. They said, look, you've beaten him. We thought he was going to win, but we would like you to have it as a memento. So I've still got it up in the old trophy cabinet there. But yeah, he had muscles on his ears. You know, he was. He was a big, muscular fella. When I say big, he wasn't so tall, but he was broad and thick. And if he had hit you, I mean, he'd have knocked me back to Spain. But thank God he was telegraphing everything, so I could be there before he hit me. But he was a puncher. But as I say, we hit him on the whiskers. I think around about the 5th round, and 9 rounds was it? Yeah. So yeah, 9 rounds, and thank God it was all over. Yeah.
Looming on the horizon was the young Joe Bugner. They met in March 1971 and Henry was to retire on a major controversy.
I have no axe to grind with Joe Bugner, never had to. I mean, if there was any sort of grumble, I suppose I had a grumble with the referee, because I still think, but I mean, I suppose the referee saw it and read it how he thought it was, but I mean, I still think I don't have to win. But I think where I made the mistake was, see, about 2 weeks before that fight, I had announced in the paper that this was going to be my last fight. I'm going to have this fight. I want to finish on top. I want to finish unbeaten. I'm going to get out. And I think, I'm not sure if Harry Levine said to the referee, look, we give it to the young guy, give it to the young guy. We got to work with him, he's going to take over, we've got to work with him. If it's close, give it to the young guy. And that's what I believe happened. But I still think I done enough to win by 2 rounds. The referee maybe lose it by a quarter of a point in them days, which was 1 round. So that was it. I got out of it, and that's it. Yeah.
10 seconds. And there it is. It's over. And Cooper gives him a pat and says, well done, and he's given it to Bugner. He's given it to Joe Bugner, and I find that amazing. He's given it to Joe Bugner, and Cooper has lost 3 titles. And that I do not understand. And the whole of Wembley erupts into a storm of booing. And how in the world can you take away the man's 3 titles like that?
So Henry Cooper's career was sadly over. He retired aged 37. He had given boxing his all. I asked him how he would like to be remembered.
Oh, well, that's always no. I've never really given that a lot of thought, really. But, well, I think my record stands up as it is. I mean, I'd like to be known, I was a good British heavyweight champion, and I enjoyed what I was doing, and that's the big thing. So, I mean, that's all you can ask for, really. I've never really given it a lot of thought about, epitaphs on stones and things like that. But no, I enjoyed my boxing. I enjoyed what I was doing, and that's what life's all about. If you can get paid for something you enjoy doing, there's nothing better in life.
Tremendous guy to talk to.
No, he's a great guy, and he's been a great inspiration to all the young heavyweights that are coming up. But that Jack Bedell fight, there's a story told by a great famous promoter. Jack Bedell was fighting Jerry Quarry, and they had to think of an angle for the fight. So they were talking about Jack Bedell being awkward. So Jack Bedell got knocked out by Jerry Quarry in a few rounds. And at the press conference afterwards, they said, did you find anything awkward about him? And Jerry Quarry said, well, he fell sort of awkwardly.
There's not many heavyweights around that hold outrightly 3 Lonsdale belts. I mean, he was a tremendous boxer.
Well, it's something that they've actually stopped you from being able to do it, but it's actually very, very difficult, firstly, to win a British title. As easy as it may seem, it's very hard. And secondly, it's very, very difficult to win a Lonsdale belt outright. So to win 3 of them
Just shows you what a good
it's an
boxer he
amazing
was.
feat.
Although it was on a domestic level, but he sorted the Beddells, the Walkers, the McAlindens,
And they were all good fighters individually. They were all very good fighters. It was all competitive, very competitive, and he just proved that he was the best man at that time. And it was very sad to see the way he lost the title to Joe Bugner, because that is a very, very sad way to go out. He wanted to go out, and he wanted to go out with a bit of style and class, but you don't want to go out considering that you'd been robbed of it,
That's right. I mean, people say there wasn't so much politics those days as there is now, but he'd also relinquished his belts, remember, because the board wouldn't let him fight for the world title, so he gave the belts back and then re-won them.
Jeez, well, no, that is actually news to me, Gary. You just told me something I didn't know, but it's amazing. See, boxing has always been a very money-orientated game, and it's not only now, it's always been so, but more so now than before.
I mean, they could have seen Bugner as a better meal ticket at 21 than Cooper at 37, but we'll leave the politics aside, but...
Okay, well, we have to remember, Harry Gibbs must be watching this, Harry. You did all right, you did a good job.
Yeah. One thing we should mention is that he had a great team around him. Jim Wicks, the Bishop, was his manager, and Danny Holland was his cut man, and the sad news is that Danny Holland passed away this week, and then we should remember him, shouldn't we?
Yes, Danny Holland, he was a great man around boxing. He's been, even up until about last week, he's been going up the gym. He goes up the gym, he talks to all the young fighters, and I think he would be sadly missed, and I hope that he'd get a lot of support from the boxing fraternity.
Yeah, he was a cut man well into his 70s, and died at the age of 85.